By the way, it doesn't help when the owner of one of the most important platforms in the world, Mr. Elon Musk, the multi super billionaire, says irresponsible things like civil war in Britain is inevitable. Clearly, he's not much of a student of British history.
Let me take up the role of Elon Musk. It's reported that he's tweeted and amplified Tommy Robinson's tweets multiple times. It's reported that he questioned Prime Minister Starmer's statement that mosques will be protected by asking, well, shouldn't you be protecting sites of all religions? And then finally, as you said, he claimed that Britain could be heading towards civil war. What do you make of that? This man has a very responsible position to maintain, and yet he seems to be tweeting irresponsibly.
Well, it's utterly irresponsible. He may be a genius building electric vehicles. He may be a genius sending rockets to Mars or the moon or whatever. But he happens to be the owner of the most powerful media, or one of the most powerful media platforms in the world. And this is utterly irresponsible. He's a figure of some respect in his own right, and people listen to it. But most important, Karen, is he's got tens of millions of followers. So he can amp his message. I'm shocked. I mean, I know Elon Musk, I've talked with him. I'm really shocked at the way he's behaving.
Hello and welcome to a special interview for The Wire. After 8 continuous days of violence and rioting, how serious is the situation in Britain? How effectively has it been tackled by the Keir Starmer government? And what are the tensions beneath the surface of British society that have now been revealed? Joining me from London is the former editor of one of the world's greatest newspapers, the Financial Times, Lionel Barber. Mr. Barber, the United Kingdom has gone through 8 continuous days of rioting and violence, which Prime Minister Starmer has called violent right-wing thuggery, and the Sunday Times has described as a dark week for the United Kingdom. So let me start by asking, how serious is the situation? Is this a repeat of 2011?
I think it's somewhat more serious than 2011 because, as you say, Karen, we've had 6 days of 6 days of rioting, and we're likely to have more. I hate to make predictions, but this morning I read the newspapers and there's talks of protests, violent protests, organized protests in up to 60 locations around the country. This is not concentrated in the north of England. It's in the south. The only place it isn't, Karen, in case you're thinking of going on holiday, is Scotland. But that's because, and we're going to come to this obviously, the Scottish don't have high immigration.
Tell me, I'm particularly struck by the number of cities, both in England but also Northern Ireland, where the violence has occurred. Liverpool, Middlesbrough, Bolton, Rotherham, Southport, Sunderland, Hull, Blackpool, Leeds, Bristol, Nottingham, Hartlepool, Plymouth, Belfast, Birmingham. That's an incredible number of cities. And I gather in many of them, shops and houses have been vandalized, mosques attacked, and even hotels housing immigrants set on fire. Are you amazed at how fast and how wide the riots have spread?
I'm not amazed. I'm aware that this is organized through social media, through platforms like Telegram, Twitter, now X, and the speed and scale at which protests can be organized is really quite frightening. And also the way information is spread about, for example, and we need to talk about this, where there are, quote, sensitive locations. And this is particularly the precise location, the list of hotels which is housing immigrants. And I think we should tackle the immediate controversy. As some may know, was triggered by the false story spread on social media that 3 children were murdered in the most horrible way by a 17-year-old. He was described as a Muslim. He was described falsely as a Muslim. In fact, he was Welsh-born of Rwandan immigrants, and he went on a killing spree in a dance center, in a Taylor Swift themed dance center in Southport in the north of England. But the story was viewed hundreds of thousands of times, and the notion took hold that this was almost a terrorist attack inspired by a radical Islamist. And this is extremely dangerous. It's like lighting a petrol fire.
Let me pick up on what you just mentioned. How is that specific information being communicated on social media? Is it public knowledge, or is there some sort of internal ferreting out of information that is then being communicated on social media to tell people these precise locations?
No, well, we need to, again, separate this. The original false story was spread, whether there was a dark hand of another state actor. We know that the Russians are involved in propaganda. They've got outlets at one remove to influence public opinion, to stoke rage against immigration. We know about that. The security services know about that. We also know that far-right groups do use social media to spread information, false information, but also information to help them organize. Now, I think the separate point you're making, which is very important, is that some of these groups have compiled some time ago information about the location where immigrants, asylum seekers, are residing in former hotels in the country. And this is a real flashpoint, because people say, why are asylum seekers being given hotel treatment? It's 3-star, 4-star. This is in the newspapers. It's not. It's half right and half wrong. All I would say is, yes, we've had a lot of asylum seekers, not as many as Italy, not as many as Germany in 2016, but we have had asylum seekers. And by the way, they've not all been from South Asia or Africa. They've been from Ukraine, and it's been government policy to bring in asylum seekers from Ukraine.
Tell me, you mentioned right-wing groups that are behind a lot of what's happening. The one that's most commonly mentioned in the papers is the English Defence League, founded by Stephen Yaxley Lennon, better known as Tommy Robinson, but he's said to be holidaying in Cyprus. So is he coordinating all of this through social media? And if he is, how large a role is social media playing in provoking the violence and the rioting?
Well, isn't it convenient that the very moment Britain goes up in flames, Mr. Tommy Robinson happens to be on holiday in Cyprus? By the way, it looks I wonder who's paying for that 4-star hotel in Cyprus. But the serious point is, yes, they are using social media channels. You've mentioned the European Defence League. This is not really a party. I mean, it's not like the old British National Party that was once banned, I believe, back several decades ago. This is more a movement. And this is the point, that actually the police and the authorities have had trouble. They can't prescribe a party. It's quite a high, they can't necessarily track down who's involved. It's a very fluid splinter groups of people. And social media has enabled this. And by the way, it doesn't help when the owner of one of the most important platforms in the world, Mr. Elon Musk, the multi super billionaire, says irresponsible things like civil war in Britain is inevitable. Clearly, he's not much of a student of British history.
Let me take up the role of Elon Musk. It's reported that he's tweeted and amplified Tommy Robinson's tweets multiple times. It's reported that he questioned Prime Minister Starmer's statement that mosques will be protected by asking, Well, shouldn't you be protecting sites of all religions? And then finally, as you said, he claimed that Britain could be heading towards civil war. What do you make of that? This man has a very responsible position to maintain, and yet he seems to be tweeting irresponsibly.
Well, it's utterly irresponsible. He may be a genius building electric vehicles. He may be a genius sending rockets to Mars or the moon or whatever. But he happens to be the owner of the most powerful media, or one of the most powerful media platforms in the world. And this is utterly irresponsible. He's a figure of some respect in his own right, and people listen to it. But most important, Karen, is he's got tens of millions of followers. So he can amp this message. I'm shocked. I mean, I know Elon Musk, I've talked with him. I'm really shocked at the way he's behaving. We in the media know that when our proprietors, or even as editors, when we have a reach, we do not use this as a megaphone for stirring up religious and ethnic hatred. It's utterly irresponsible. And I would say to him, it's not Church of England sites that are being attacked or threatened at the moment. It's mosques. By the way, they've also burnt children's libraries. I mean, let's not get too theoretical about who these people are. They're often actually just simple vandals out for a good time, lagered up.
In one of your earlier answers in this interview, you also referred to Russia. What is the role of Russian institutions, organizations, their secret service, or whoever?
Well, I don't know, and I don't have any proof of Russian direct involvement in stoking these riots and violence. I cannot say that. What I can say is right now we are fighting a proxy war with the Russians in Ukraine. We're obviously giving assistance to Ukraine, and we know that Russia is prosecuting hybrid warfare against those countries that are supporting Ukraine. And we've had terrible relations with the Russians, particularly since the attempted assassination of the former KGB agent Sergei Skripal on English soil in Salisbury. So, it wouldn't surprise me if there was some relationship. We know that I've got to choose my words here carefully with regarding Mr. Robinson, but let me just say that our relations are appalling with Russia right now, and they won't be unhappy about what's happening. And they will see this, by the way, and I heard this directly from President Putin when I interviewed him back in 2019. I mean, they will see this as part of the story of Western decadence and English decline, and the fact we can't control our populations, or we're suffering from serious civil disorder.
Let's come to the way the British government has indicated it will respond to the fact that social media is fueling hate speech and fueling, in a sense, these riots. Writing in the Times on Monday, Home Secretary Yvette Cooper said that those who whip up hate on social media would face the same reckoning as physical rioters. And yesterday, the Director of Public Prosecutions told the BBC, even if you're tweeting from abroad, we'll bring you home to face justice. Now, to me, that sounds in sharp contrast to Britain's usual position in support of free speech. So would I be right in saying that this is a significant shift in Britain's traditional attitude?
It's a significant rhetorical shift. And we also have to distinguish between free speech and inciting violence. I mean, as you well know, you're not allowed to shout fire in a crowded theatre. I mean, there are some limits to free speech. The difference, which you're pinpointing, is the government going to come after you if you are using online platforms to incite violence, or indeed to organize violence? And that's at least, I believe, one case where somebody has come up before the courts. And we should say, by the way, at least 500 people have been arrested already in 6 days, and 100 people have been charged. One of those with actually organizing, they've been able to track him down, organizing violent protests through social media.
Now, Peter Kyle, the Science and Technology Secretary, has also spoken of action against social media platforms. To my mind, that's one step further than taking action against people who are simply spreading hate speech. I noticed that Tommy Robinson was permanently banned from Twitter, as it was then called, in 2018, but restored by Elon Musk last year. Articles in The Guardian say, and I'm quoting, the resurgence of far-right violence in the UK is in part due to Elon Musk's decision to allow figures such as Tommy Robinson back on the social media platform X. Could the British government take action against platforms like Twitter, Facebook, and TikTok?
I think it's hard. It's hard to prove, but I think they're putting them on notice, and they're certainly going to look at the way in which these platforms are being abused. Now, I have an X feed, not self-promotion here, Karen, but the fact is that I'm looking at my feed and it's full of violent images. It's full of hatred. It's a sink. I mean, this is a different platform post-Musk ownership than it was 3 years ago. I mean, it's definitely deteriorated, and the algorithms are promoting violent content. There's no question. And who knows how that impact when you see masked men, either Muslims carrying machetes on the streets, or white men attacking Muslims or Asian Britons on the streets. It's going to whip up sentiment. And the risk, of course, is that these thugs are trying to actually provoke a violent reaction from the Muslim population in the country. And we should talk a bit about that.
I will happily come to that in a moment's time. You began this interview by saying that what's happening today and what has been happening for the last week is more serious than 2011. I take it it's not just the spread and the number of cities involved that makes it more serious. It's also the insidious role of social media that wasn't available in quite the same way in 2011 as it's become dominant today. Am I right?
Totally right. This is about spreading misinformation at speed and scale that was not around in 2011. It's really frightening. And we've got a man who's a kind of free speech Ayatollah. I shouldn't use that word. He's a free speech, hardliner, no curbs whatsoever on free speech. And he owns the platform.
And he's allowing that platform to be misused by people to spread hate-filled messages.
That's what I believe too.
What about the role of Nigel Farage, the Reform Party leader? In his tweets, he said that what's happening is nothing to what will happen in coming weeks. He also said that the far right is a reaction to what he called fear, discomfort, and unease. Papers like The Times have suggested in articles that they've carried that he's fanning the flames. Do you believe he is?
I do believe he's fanning the flames, and he's consciously doing so. Now, he's exactly what he's doing. But I'm just going to say one thing in defense of those who say that, first of all, some of the people on the streets, they're women. They're people who are generally concerned about the level of immigration in this country. And when Farage points to the fact that successive governments have pledged to reduce net immigration, and Brexit in 2016 was supposed to do so, to bring it down from around 500,000 a year. In fact, if you look at 2022, it was 800,000, not EU, but from the other parts of the world, particularly Africa, Middle East, subcontinent. And then last year it was more than 600,000. And the reason is because there's gaps in the labor market. We don't have people who do certain jobs, particularly in social care, hospitals, etc. We do have a labor market shortage, but the government have not explained this, and they've not made the case for immigration, controlled immigration. So that's the first point. The second point is that we have had a problem with asylum seekers and illegal immigration, notably across the channel in these boats. And this, again, on the right in the Conservative Party, they've constantly said they would do something about it. They've been at war with the French, rhetorically, etc., politically. So there's not been proper cooperation there. And then these pictures on social media, on television, of illegal asylum seekers, illegal immigrants coming across on boats is very inflammatory. So there is a problem.
Can I put it like this, Mr. Barber? There are two types of immigration that British society is, in a sense, grappling with. There's illegal immigration, the people who cross illegally on boats and then get housed in hotels, and clearly that has to be stopped. But there is also legal immigration, controlled immigration, which in some ways is essential for the British economy because you simply don't have enough young people for the jobs that are necessary. Are the two getting confused in the popular mind?
Well, they're being deliberately conflated and confused by the likes of Nigel Farage, who sees this as a chance for him to create a new political movement and party, which he'd be the head, which would drag Britain away from the sort of centre-right to a sort of nativist, Trumpist right. I mean, that's why Nigel Farage is best buddies with Donald Trump. And Farage, remember, it was largely him who drove the debate around immigration in the run-up to Brexit, who pushed the party, the Conservative Party, to the right. He's a very influential figure. He's now been elected to Parliament, but guess what? He's only made 2 speeches. He's actually spending most of his time on social media, stoking it.
Tell me, we know about the role of Nigel Farage in stoking sentiments on immigration, but is the Conservative Party that was in power until just about a month ago also in some senses to blame? Are people like Sue Braverman and Priti Patel, both of them ironically of Indian origin, to blame for having created a misleading impression that conflates illegal immigration with controlled and legal immigration and gives an impression that the government is doing absolutely nothing?
Well, Karan, let's be clear. We must draw a distinction now between Priti Patel and Suella Braverman. Both were Home Secretaries. But actually, Suella Braverman has been stoking outrage. And by the way, she's out of the Conservative race. But Priti Patel has taken an honourable stand, denounced the rioters and denounced Farage for inciting discontent and inciting these people on the streets. And she's been, I think, very good. Now, she's in the race. She is quite a hardliner on immigration, but I would put her on a small pedestal as a result of her remarks this week.
In other words, because of the honesty of criticizing Farage in particular.
Well, and for drawing the distinction, which you rightly have done, between illegal and necessary legal immigration to fill gaps in the labour market.
One of the impressions that an Indian audience listening to you will get is that British politicians have not been fully honest with their own people about immigration. They've used immigration to whip up sentiment for causes that they support. They've conflated between illegal and necessary and legal immigration. And people like Nigel Farage simply used it to whip up sentiments. Would I be right in saying that that impression is at least partly correct?
Well, I think that all your many millions of viewers in India, those people who are watching, I would say they're probably more than half right on this. We haven't been honest about immigration. And by the way, more importantly and more generally, and I don't want to get too philosophical about this, the fact is that we've sort of embraced or multiculturalism. We've kidded ourselves that we can have a high level of immigration, that we're not going to go the French route of a secular state, that if you're Muslim, you will sort of somehow be seamlessly integrated into the English British community, and all will be fine under a sort of, fuzzy Britishness, and it will all be fine. But actually, there are some communities that are definitely not integrated, particularly there have been high concentrations of immigration in northern cities, in places of high unemployment, and there's definitely ethnic tension there. But we never use the word ethnic tension, because we all believe we're one part of one happy British community.
You're saying
and it's worked for a while.
You're saying something that potentially is very important. Are you suggesting that multiculturalism, something that the world has recognized about Britain, particularly because of your Asian prime ministers, your Asian home secretaries, chancellors of the exchequer, foreign secretaries, that maybe this multiculturalism that the world has recognized has not been quite the success, that there have been islands of ethnic identity that have held out against integration? Is that, in a sense, what you're hinting at?
Well, I'm not hinting. I'm actually saying this, but I do want to underline it is pretty remarkable, and the Conservative Party should get huge credit for this. I mean, we did have, a Hindu prime minister just now, Rishi Sunak. David Lammy is our first, I believe, coloured foreign secretary. Of course, they're English, but they have different ethnic background. Kemi Badenoch, also of Nigerian origin. She may be the next Conservative Party leader. I mean, there's been a fantastic success story in terms of assimilation and the opportunities for people of different ethnic backgrounds to ascend in politics in Britain. But where we've somewhat glossed this over is, well, what about those communities, those parts of that don't want to integrate, where they want a Muslim-only hardline Muslim school in the middle of Birmingham? What's the Education Authority doing that for, or supporting that? That's happened several years ago. So I think what you're saying and what I'm saying is that we've discovered the limits of multiculturalism.
And in a sense, these riots that we're seeing are a result of that, amongst other things as well.
Well, among the other things are important. I mean, we have very high levels, huge, appalling problem of worklessness, people not wanting to work, although interestingly, a number of the people arrested actually have good jobs. They were just sort of out on the town wanting to bait the police. I mean, we have a lawlessness in the country at the moment. We have a disrespect for the police, and we have unresolved socioeconomic problems in areas of high unemployment. That's a problem.
Hi, I'm Karan Thapar. Over the last few years, I hope you've been watching my program, The Interview on the Wire. During that period, I've interviewed doctors, politicians, businessmen, scientists, authors, and even the occasional Nobel laureate. For me, it's been exciting. I hope it's been enjoyable for you. But these, as you know, are tough times, and if this program is going to remain bold, independent, and sometimes even defiant, then I think we need your support. At the end of the day, it's a truism, but editorial independence is best defended by the viewers. So if you would like this program to remain the way it is, forthright, outspoken, and interesting, then would you consider supporting us? All you have to do is to click on the description at the bottom. But more than anything else, I hope you will continue to watch The Interview. Your viewership means an awful lot to me. We're coming to the end of this interview, Mr. Barber. Let me end by asking, how serious a test is this for the Starmer government, a new government, and still an inexperienced government. On Sunday, the Prime Minister spoke to the nation. On Monday and again yesterday, he convened an emergency COBRA meeting, the government's top security body. He's promised to create a standing army of police officers to battle violence, and the government is now talking about even pressing terrorism charges where thought appropriate against rioters. How do you evaluate that response?
Well, I'd give them fairly high marks at the moment. And remember that it's an inexperienced government. I mean, they haven't been in power since 2010. But Sir Keir Starmer, is a former director of public prosecutions. He was DPP head in 2011, that year of riots that you described. So he has plenty of experience in dealing with crime, law and order issues. I think they were right to convene the COBRA emergency security powers. They've got to look at the levels of police. Their police funding has been hard hit over the years, in the years of austerity. I think they need more police trained on the streets. They need to make the police a presence that's feared by rioters and not abused, as you've seen. But it is a very important test. Maybe the parallel to draw is with Margaret Thatcher, who came in 1979 with a much smaller majority than Keir Starmer, not a lot of experience, but in her first challenges, notably industrial strike, she turned the crisis to her advantage. So this is a real test of the new government and a test of Keir Starmer's leadership.
I want to end by going back to a thought that you expressed a moment ago, because I think it's so important it bears repetition for an Indian audience. We think of Britain as perhaps one of the most successful multicultural countries in the world. You've had a Hindu prime minister of Indian origin, you've had a black foreign secretary, you have so at the moment, you've had Asian home secretaries, you've had Asian and perhaps even black chancellors of the exchequer, and several other ministers and even leaders and chairman of the Conservative Party who are of Asian or black origin. And yet, deeper down at ground level, multiculturalism is not the complete success the front image suggests. That's a paradox, a contradiction, isn't it?
Well, it is, Karan, but this is not Rome 412. The barbarians are not at the gates. We still have role models for people of different ethnic backgrounds who've risen to the top of British politics. It's worth pointing out that the rioters are not actually, so far, Muslim or black or anything. These are white people, many of whom are just thugs.
Mr. Barber, thank you very much for the time you've given me. I'm deeply grateful. Take care. Stay safe.
Thank you, Karan.
Hi, I'm Karan Thapar. Over the last few years, I hope you've been watching my program, The Interview on the Wire. During that period, I've interviewed doctors, politicians, businessmen, scientists, authors, and even the occasional Nobel laureate. For me, it's been exciting. I hope it's been enjoyable for you. But these, as you know, are tough times, and if this program is going to remain bold, independent, and sometimes even defiant, then I think we need your support. At the end of the day, it's a truism, but editorial independence is best defended by the viewers. So if you would like this program to remain the way it is, forthright, outspoken, and interesting, then would you consider supporting us? All you have to do is to click on the description at the bottom. But more than anything else, I hope you will continue to watch The Interview. Your viewership means an awful lot to me.